The summer heat pressed down on Oakidge like a heavy blanket. Located in the lush forest of rural Oregon, the small town had always been a place where time seemed to move a little slower than the rest of the world. Main Street featured the same businesses it had for decades: Johnson's Hardware, Oakidge Pharmacy, Turner's Grocery, and right in the middle, Ruby's Cafe. Ruby's was the beating heart of Oakidge. The red brick building with its weathered wooden sign had stood there since 1954, serving comfort food and strong coffee to generations of locals. The cafe's large windows offered a perfect view of the street, where occasional logging trucks rumbled past and familiar faces strolled by with predictable regularity. Behind the counter stood Marge Wilson, the 60-something owner who'd inherited the place from her mother, Ruby. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as she wiped down the worn Formica countertop. The cafe's morning rush had subsided, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. "Order up for the Henderson farm," Marge called out, sliding a large paper bag across the counter. Sarah Miller appeared from the back room, adjusting her simple blue cap with the Ruby's Cafe logo. At 35, Sarah wasn't young by most standards, but in Oakidge she was still considered one of the younger folks. Her blonde hair was cut short in a practical style that framed an attractive face that rarely wore makeup. A fitted denim jacket covered a plain white t-shirt paired with well-worn jeans and sturdy boots. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything remarkable. "Got it, Marge?" Sarah said, her voice carrying a calm assurance that somehow made everyone around her feel more at ease. "That's the breakfast platters and apple pie, right? And Bill's usual extra side of bacon," Marge added with a knowing smile. "That man's going to clog his arteries one of these days." Sarah nodded, her blue eyes scanning the contents of the bag with a precision that seemed almost professional. A quick inventory that took less than 2 seconds. "Should be back in 40 minutes unless Mrs. Henderson wants to talk about her grandkids again," Sarah said, tucking the bag securely into her delivery backpack. "Take your time. Things are slow today." Marge glanced at the nearly empty cafe. "And Sarah, be careful on that back road. Tom Johnson said he saw some bikers camping near Miller's Creek yesterday. Probably just tourists passing through, but you never know these days." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, a momentary sharpening of focus that disappeared so quickly most people would have missed it, but her voice remained casual. "I'll keep an eye out." The bell above the door chimed as Sarah stepped out into the summer morning. She unhooked her bicycle from the rack, a practical, sturdy model with a large basket mounted on the front and saddlebags on either side. Most deliveries in Oakidge were made this way. The town wasn't large, and a car seemed excessive for short trips. As Sarah pedaled down Main Street, she moved with an efficiency of motion that didn't draw attention but would have impressed a kinesiologist. Her back remained straight. Her breathing measured her pace steady. No wasted energy, nothing flashy, just someone who knew exactly how to move. The townspeople who waved to her as she passed saw only what they expected to see. The quiet delivery girl from Ruby's, who'd moved back to town about 18 months ago to look after her ailing mother. Sarah had grown up in Oakidge, but left after high school. The story was that she joined the Army, then worked some government job back east before returning home. Most people in town didn't pry much beyond that. The Henderson farm lay about 3 meters outside town, down a winding road that followed Oakidge Creek before cutting through a stretch of dense forest. Sarah maintained her steady pace, occasionally shifting gears as the terrain changed. Her eyes, however, never stopped moving. Scanning the road ahead, checking the tree line, glancing at reflective surfaces to view what was behind her. Old habits. As she rounded a bend in the road, the sound reached her before she saw the source. The distinctive rumble of multiple motorcycle engines. Sarah didn't alter her pace or show any reaction, but her mind immediately catalogued the sound. At least 4 bikes, maybe 5. Heavy machines, probably American-made, not sport bikes. They appeared around the next curve. 5 riders on gleaming Harley-Davidsons moving in a disciplined formation. The lead rider was a mountain of a man, his massive frame making even the large bikes seem small beneath him. Long, graying, bearded leather vests covered in patches, arms thick as tree trunks, and decorated with tattoos. Behind him rode 4 others, similarly attired, but varying in size and age. As they approached, Sarah moved her bicycle to the far right of the road, giving them plenty of room to pass. She kept her head down, appearing to focus on the road surface, but her peripheral vision took in every detail. The patches on their vests, the weapons almost certainly concealed under their leather jackets, the way they moved in perfect coordination, like men who had ridden together for years. The lead biker slowed as they passed her, his head turning slightly in her direction. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. His were cold, calculating, assessing. Sarah kept her expression neutral, giving away nothing. Just another local on a delivery run. After they passed, Sarah didn't turn to watch them go, but instead focused on the sound of their engines tracking their progress by ear as they continued toward town. Only when the rumble had faded did she allow herself a single deep breath. The Henderson farm appeared ahead, a modest 2-story farmhouse with a red barn and several outbuildings surrounded by fields of hay ready for cutting. As Sarah wheeled her bike up the gravel driveway, the front door opened and Martha Henderson stepped onto the porch. The 60-year-old farmer's wife had a warm smile that immediately put people at ease. "Right on time as always, Sarah," Martha called out. "Bill's out in the backfield, but he'll be sorry he missed you. Come on in for a minute. I just made fresh lemonade." Sarah secured her bike and carried the food bag up to the porch. "Just for a minute, Mrs. Henderson. I told Marge I'd be back soon." The farmhouse kitchen was bright and airy, filled with the smell of fresh-baked bread. Martha poured lemonade into 2 glasses, while Sarah unpacked the food order onto the counter. So Martha said, her tone shifting to the particular cadence that rural gossip have perfected over generations. "Did you see those bikers on your way here? They rode past about 10 minutes ago, 5 of them looking rough as sandpaper." Sarah accepted the lemonade with a nod of thanks. "I passed them on the road." "Any idea who they are?" Martha shook her head. "Not the usual tourist types, that's for sure. Bill says they've been camping down by Miller's Creek the last couple days. He thought they might be with that group causing trouble over in Ashland last month. What were they called? Iron something?" "Iron Skulls," Sarah supplied, then immediately regretted it when Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's right. How'd you know that?" Sarah shrugged casually. "It was in the Oakage Gazette last week. There was an article about them causing problems in towns along Highway 58. Martha seemed to accept this explanation, while Sheriff Collins better keep an eye on them. "Last thing we need is trouble, especially with the summer festival coming up next weekend." They chatted for a few more minutes, Martha providing updates on her grandchildren and the latest town gossip, before Sarah politely extracted herself and headed back to town. As she pedaled, her mind processed what Martha had said. The Iron Skulls. The name brought back memories Sarah had worked hard to compartmentalize. Not from her military service that had been another lifetime ago, but from her subsequent work. The classified operation she'd been part of for 7 years after leaving the Delta Force, the specialized task force focusing on domestic criminal organizations using military-grade weapons and tactics. The Iron Skulls weren't just a rowdy biker gang. They were one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking organizations on the West Coast, with ties to cartels in Mexico and distribution networks across 6 states. Their public face was that of a motorcycle club, rough but within the boundaries of the law. Their private operations involved methamphetamine production, weapons trafficking, and targeted violence against rivals or witnesses. And now they were in Oakage, a town with exactly 2 sheriff's deputies and a part-time police force. Sarah's return trip to Ruby's was quicker than her outbound journey. As she approached town, she noticed the 5 motorcycles parked outside the Rusty Nail, the only bar in Oakage that opened before noon. She filed away the information and continued on to the cafe. The lunch rush was in full swing when Sarah walked through the door. Marge waved her over to the counter, where 3 more delivery orders waited. "Did Martha talk your ear off?" Marge asked as she rang up a customer's bill. "Just the usual grandkid updates," Sarah replied, picking up the next delivery slip, "and some talk about those bikers in town." Marge's expression darkened slightly. "They came in about 20 minutes ago, ordered breakfast, made too much noise, left a mess. Tipped well, though, I'll give them that." She lowered her voice. "One of them big fella with a skull tattoo on his forearm kept asking questions about the town. Who owns what businesses? How many police we have? That sort of thing." Sarah's face revealed nothing, but her mind was already calculating possibilities. "None of them good. Probably just passing through," she said lightly. "Hope so. Anyway, this order's for Doc Wilson's office, then the bank, then the hardware store." Sarah nodded and got back to work. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of deliveries, brief conversations, and careful observation. By closing time at 8:00 p.m., she had mapped out the bikers' movements through town. They'd visited nearly every business, spent 2 hours at the Rusty Nail, and ridden out toward Miller's Creek around 6:00 p.m. As Sarah helped Marge close up Ruby's, the local news plate on the small television behind the counter, the broadcast cut to a segment that immediately caught Sarah's attention. Police in Ashland are still investigating last month's arson at the City Hall Annex. The anchor reported sources close to the investigation suggest the fire may be connected to missing evidence in a major drug trafficking case. The Ashland Police Department has declined to comment on rumors that the notorious Iron Skulls motorcycle gang may be involved. The report continued, but Sarah had heard enough. The pattern was clear. The Iron Skulls were moving through small towns along Highway 58, eliminating evidence and establishing new distribution points for their operation. "Terrible business, that fire," Marge commented as she wiped down the last table. "My sister lives in Ashland, says the whole police department's in chaos, trying to rebuild their files." Sarah made a non-committal sound as she swept the floor. Her mind was elsewhere, running through contingencies and calculating risks. "You heading straight home tonight?" Marge asked as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. "Yeah, Mom's waiting for dinner," Sarah replied, securing her backpack to her bicycle. "See you tomorrow, Marge." The ride to Sarah's modest bungalow on the edge of town took less than 10 minutes. The small house sat back from the road, partially hidden by mature pine trees. A neatly maintained garden bordered the front walkway, and warm light glowed from the windows. Sarah wheeled her bicycle around to the back of the house and through the door into a small utility room. She secured 3 separate locks on the door before proceeding into the kitchen. Eleanor Miller sat at the kitchen table, a book open in front of her. At 68, she retained the sharp features that Sarah had inherited, though her once blonde hair had turned silver. Her hands, twisted slightly by arthritis, marked the pages of her book. "You're late," Eleanor observed without looking up. "Busy day," Sarah replied, hanging her jacket on a hook by the door. "How are you feeling? Same as yesterday. Better than tomorrow will be." Eleanor finally looked up, her blue eyes, identical to Sarah's, sharp and assessing. "They're in town, aren't they?" There was no need to ask who they were. Sarah nodded once as she filled a kettle at the sink, and 5 of them. "Advanced party, probably." Eleanor closed her book. "You should call Tom." "Not yet. I need more information first. Eleanor sighed. Sarah, you're not with the task force anymore. You don't need to handle this alone. I'm not handling anything. I'm just keeping an eye on the situation. Sarah put the kettle on the stove and turned to face her mother. And Tom's not with the DEA anymore either. He's retired. Like you're retired, Eleanor's tone was pointed. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Her relationship with her mother had always been complicated by the things she couldn't say. The classified operations, the targets eliminated the missions that officially never happened. But Eleanor had been an army nurse during Vietnam. She understood enough. I'll make some calls tomorrow. Sarah finally conceded just to update some old contacts. Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Now there's stew in the oven. I managed that much today. After dinner, Sarah helped her mother to bed, then moved through the house in a precise security check. Windows locked, blinds drawn, alarm systemed. Only then did she descend to the basement. To a casual observer, the basement appeared to be a typical storage area, boxes stacked neatly against walls, old furniture covered with sheets, a washer and dryer in one corner. But behind a seemingly solid concrete wall, accessed by a hidden mechanism, lay a room that reflected the other side of Sarah Miller's life. The hidden room was small but efficiently organized. One wall held a gun safe and a separate cabinet for ammunition. Another featured a communication station with encrypted equipment that would have looked at home in a military command center. A third wall was dedicated to physical training of pull-up bar weights and a heavy bag. Sarah entered a complex code into the gun safe and opened it to reveal a carefully maintained collection: a Glock 19 handgun, a Remington 870 shotgun, an M4 carbine with various modifications, and several other weapons. She removed the Glock, checked it methodically, and secured it in a concealed holster at the small of her back. Moving to the communication station, she activated an encrypted laptop and entered a series of passwords. The screen populated with a secure connection to a database that officially didn't exist. Sarah typed Iron Skulls into the search field and began reviewing the latest intelligence. What she found confirmed her suspicions. The Iron Skulls had expanded their operations significantly in the past year, moving into smaller communities where law enforcement presence was minimal. Their method was consistent: establish a presence, intimidate local businesses into cooperation, set up distribution points for their product, eliminate any evidence in nearby jurisdictions that might lead back to them, and they were violent. The database contained reports of beatings, arson, and at least 3 suspected murders attributed to the gang, but never proven in court. Witnesses had a habit of recanting testimony or disappearing altogether. A new entry caught Sarah's eye: a federal indictment against Raymond Crusher Thompson, the Iron Skulls president, unsealed just 2 weeks ago. The charges included racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. Thompson had immediately gone off the grid, last seen heading east from his base in Northern California. Sarah studied the attached photograph. The massive bearded man who'd led the bikers through Oakage that morning was undoubtedly Raymond Thompson, which meant the Iron Skulls weren't just passing through. They were hiding their leader while continuing their operation, and they'd chosen Oakage, her town, as their new base. Sarah closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, considering her options. The simplest approach would be to alert the FBI and let them handle it. But federal response times to rural locations were measured in days, not hours. By the time a tactical team could deploy, the Iron Skulls might have already established themselves in Oakage, and if they felt threatened, their standard response was overwhelming violence. No, she needed more information before involving federal authorities. She needed to understand exactly what they were planning and how many more members might be en route to Oakage. Most importantly, she needed to determine if they knew who she was, if her cover as a simple delivery girl was still intact. Sarah checked her watch. Nearly midnight time to do some reconnaissance. 20 minutes later, Sarah pedaled her bicycle along the dark road toward Miller's Creek. She changed into dark clothing but otherwise maintained her delivery girl appearance, the perfect cover for someone out late after a long shift. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Miller's Creek was a popular camping spot about 4 miles outside town. A widle area beside the creek with fire pits and crude tables maintained by local volunteers. The Iron Skulls had chosen the most remote section accessible by a dirt track that branched off from the main camping area. Sarah left her bicycle hidden in dense undergrowth half a mile from their camp and continued on foot, moving silently through the forest with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this many times before. As she drew closer, she detected the glow of a campfire through the trees in the low murmur of voices. She found a position on a slight rise that offered a clear view of the camp while providing good cover among the dense trees. From her vantage point, she counted 8 motorcycles, the 5 she'd seen earlier, plus 3 more that must have arrived during the day. Around the campfire sat 7 men passing bottles and talking in low voices. The 8th was presumably on watch somewhere in the perimeter. Sarah remained absolutely still, controlling her breathing as she had been trained, becoming part of the forest around her. Her eyes picked out details in the dim light. Weapons placed within easy reach. Duffel bags that likely contained drugs or cash. A satellite phone being used by Thompson. "Tomorrow we bring in the rest," Thompson was saying, his deep voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Hank's bringing the main shipment through on the logging road. Should be here by noon." "What about the town?" asked one of the others, a wiry man with a shaved head. "Sheriff seemed a little too interested when I stopped for gas." Thompson's laugh was like rocks in a grinder. "Twelman Department Jimbo. They're not going to be a problem. We'll start the buy-offs tomorrow. Standard arrangement. Any business that doesn't play ball gets a visit from you and Deacon." The conversation continued with Thompson laying out their plan. They would establish a distribution center in Oakage using the summer festival as cover to bring in their product and make connections with buyers from across the state. They had already identified several businesses as potential fronts, including an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that would serve as their main base of operations. "What about the cafe?" asked another man. "That old lady didn't seem too friendly." "Ruby's," Gwym Thompson considered for a moment. "Seems popular. Might be useful. Send Deacon to have a chat with her tomorrow. If she doesn't want our protection, maybe we'll help ourselves to some pie." The crude joke elicited laughter from the group. Sarah had heard enough. She began to slowly withdraw, maintaining her silent movement through the underbrush. She had nearly reached her bicycle when a twig snapped to her right. She froze, every sense heightened. 20 yards away, barely visible in the darkness, stood a large figure smoking a cigarette. The 8th Iron Skull, the one on watch duty. He hadn't seen her yet, but he was between her and her bicycle. Sarah assessed her options in an instant. She could circle around him, adding time but avoiding detection. She could neutralize him quietly, but that would alert the gang that someone was watching them. Or she could create a diversion. She chose the third option. Picking up a rock, she threw it with precision into the woods far to her left. It crashed through branches and underbrush, creating enough noise to sound like a deer moving through the forest. The guard immediately turned toward the sound, moving away from his post to investigate. Sarah used the opportunity to slip past him and retrieve her bicycle. By the time the guard returned to his position, she was already a mile away, pedaling steadily back toward town. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten as Sarah locked her bicycle in the garage and entered her house. She moved silently through the darkened rooms, not wanting to wake her mother. In the kitchen, we poured a glass of water and stood by the window watching as the first birds began to stir in the trees outside. The iron skulls were planning something much bigger than she had initially suspected. By tomorrow, their full complement would be in Oak Ridge, along with a major drug shipment, and they had specifically mentioned Ruby's Cafe. Sarah knew she needed to act quickly, but also carefully. One wrong move could put everyone in town at risk. She needed a plan, and she needed help. Picking up her secure phone, she composed a text message to a number few people in the world had access to. Birds nesting in the oak tree. Full flock arriving tomorrow. Need gardening advice. Within minutes, a response appeared. Horticulturist available. ETA 72 hours. Maintain observation only. Sarah frowned at the message. 72 hours. That meant the earliest her former DEA contact could have a team in place would be 3 days from now. By then, the Iron Skulls would be fully established in Oak Ridge, and their shipment would be hidden away somewhere. She would have to handle the initial containment herself, and that meant she needed local resources, people she could trust, people who could help her monitor the Iron Skulls until federal support arrived. Fortunately, Oak Ridge had more secrets than its peaceful appearance suggested, and Sarah Miller wasn't the only former specialist who had chosen the small town as a place to disappear. As dawn broke over the mountains, Sarah finally allowed herself a few hours of rest. But her sleep was light, her mind still processing what she had learned. The peaceful routine of Oak Ridge was about to be shattered, and Sarah Miller, the quiet delivery girl from Ruby's Cafe, was the only one who stood between the town and the approaching storm. In her dreams, she heard motorcycles. Ruby's Cafe opened at 600 a.m. sharp, as it had every day for nearly 7 decades. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, her face showing no signs of her nighttime reconnaissance or abbreviated sleep. She moved through her opening duties with practiced efficiency, brewing coffee, checking supplies, wiping down already clean counters. Marge arrived at 5:55, unlocking the front door with the same brass key her mother had used before her. She raised an eyebrow at Sarah, who was already in full uniform. "You're eager this morning," Marge commented, hanging her weathered denim jacket on the coat rack. Sarah poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her boss. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I might as well make myself useful." The morning proceeded with its usual rhythm of regular customers' familiar orders and easy conversation. By 9:00 a.m., the breakfast rush had dwindled to a few lingering patrons reading newspapers or tapping on laptops. Sarah was organizing delivery orders when the bell above the door chimed. The man who entered was lean and hard-looking, with close-cropped gray hair and the ramrod straight posture that screamed military to anyone who knew the signs. He wore a flannel shirt and work pants with heavy boots that had seen years of use. To most people in town, he was just Frank Weber, the taciturn handyman, who could fix anything from leaky faucets to faulty electrical systems. To Sarah, he was Captain Franklin Weber, former Special Forces, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before retiring to Oak Ridge 5 years ago. Frank nodded to Marge, then took a seat at the counter directly in front of where Sarah was working. "Morning, Frank," Marge called out. "The usual, please." His voice was growly from years of shouting orders and dusty terrain. Sarah set a mug of black coffee in front of him, making brief but significant eye contact. Frank's expression didn't change, but he gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Got a leak under my kitchen sink," he said casually. "Any chance you could ask your mom if I can borrow that pipe wrench I lent her last month?" Sarah played along with the cover story. "Sure, I'll slap by your place after my shift if that works." "Perfect." Frank sipped his coffee, then lowered his voice. "Heard some motorcycles riding by my place late last night. Sounded like they were headed out to Miller's Creek. Probably those bikers who came through yesterday, Sarah replied, keeping her tone conversational as she wiped down the counter. I passed them on my delivery route. Frank's eyes, still sharp and assessing, despite his 60-plus years, narrowed slightly. Seemed like a lot of bikes for tourists. Before Sarah could respond, the bell over the door chimed again. This time the atmosphere in the cafe changed instantly. Conversation stopped. Coffee cups paused midway to lips. Every eye turned toward the newcomer. He was tall and powerfully built, with a shaved head and a beard trimmed close to his jaw. His leather vest displayed the Iron Skull's insignia, prominently a chrome skull with red eyes wearing an iron crown. Multiple patches adorned the vest, each representing claimed territory or accomplished missions that no legitimate motorcycle club would admit to. His name was Deacon Mills, according to the intelligence Sarah had reviewed the night before. Former Army dishonorable discharge enforcer for the Iron Skulls. Specialized in intimidation and arson. Deacon surveyed the cafe with cold eyes, his gaze lingering on each person for just long enough to make them uncomfortable. When he looked at Sarah, she kept her expression neutral, projecting nothing but mild curiosity. "Morning," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for a man his size. "Heard this place makes the best breakfast in town." Marge, to her credit, maintained her professional demeanor. "We like to think so. Take any seat you want. Sarah will bring you a menu." Sarah grabbed a laminated menu and approached Deacon, who had selected a booth with a clear view of both the front door and the kitchen entrance. Basic tactical positioning. She set the menu down without comment and turned to leave. "You're the delivery girl, right?" Deacon asked, stopping her. Sarah paused, then turned back with a polite smile. "That's right. Can I get you some coffee while you look at the menu?" "Sure." His eyes never left her face. "Saw you on the road yesterday. You get around town quite a bit with those deliveries. It's a small town. I go everywhere eventually." Deacon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good to know. I might have some deliveries of my own that need handling while we're in town." The implied meaning was clear. The Iron Skulls were looking for local distribution channels for their product. Sarah kept her expression pleasantly disinterested. "Ruby's just handles food deliveries, but I'm sure you can find what you need." She turned toward the coffee pot, feeling his eyes on her back the entire time. At the counter, Frank Weber watched the interaction with the practiced casualness of a man who had conducted surveillance in hostile territory. When Sarah returned with Deacon's coffee, he murmured, "Your mom still need help with that fence repair." Sarah caught his meaning immediately. Frank was activating their informal network, the veterans and former operators who had settled in Oakage to escape their pasts. "Yes," she replied softly. "The West Side, particularly." Frank nodded once, left cash for his coffee, and departed without another word. Sarah knew what would happen next. Frank would contact Bill Henderson, former Marine Scout sniper, who would reach out to Doc Wilson, former Navy corpsman with combat experience. The network would activate, creating a web of observation posts around Oakage within hours. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah maintained her cover serving customers and preparing deliveries while keeping one eye on Deacon. He ate slowly, making his breakfast last while he studied everyone who entered or left the cafe. He made one phone call, speaking too quietly for Sarah to overhear, but his expression suggested he was reporting back to Thompson. When Deacon finally approached the register to pay his bill, Marge rang him up with professional courtesy. He leaned on the counter, invading her personal space. "Nice place you got here," he said, glancing around. "Been in business long, since 1954, Marge replied stiffly. "That's impressive. Tough for small businesses these days." Deacon's tone shifted subtly. "Lot of unexpected expenses can come up. Insurance keeps maintenance security concerns. Margie's spine straightened. At 60-some, she had dealt with difficult customers for decades and recognized a thinly veiled threat when she heard one. "We manage just fine, thank you." Deacon smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Sure you do. But everyone can use a little protection, right? My associates and we look out for places we like. Make sure nothing bad happens to them." He placed a business card on the counter. "Why don't you discuss it with whoever makes the financial decisions around here? We'll stop by tomorrow to work out an arrangement." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving behind a cafe full of tense customers and one very angry cafe owner. Marge picked up the card between two fingers as if it might contaminate her. "The nerve of that man," she muttered, then looked at Sarah. "Can you believe that, coming in here and trying to shake us down like it's the 1950s? Sarah took the card and examined it. It was blank, except for a phone number in the Iron Skull's insignia. "What are you going to do?" Marge snorted. "Call Sheriff Collins for all the good that'll do. Honestly, with the summer festival starting tomorrow, he's already short-handed." She sighed heavily. "My father dealt with guys like this back in the day. They move through small towns like locusts, take what they want, destroy what they don't, then move on." Sarah returned the card. Maybe they'll just leave after the festival. Maybe. But Marge didn't sound convinced. "Meanwhile, I've got deliveries that need to go out. The bank order is ready, then the pharmacy and town hall." Sarah nodded and gathered the delivery bags, securing them in her backpack. As she headed for the door, Marge called after her. "Sarah, be careful out there today. Those bikers, I don't like the way that one was looking at you." Sarah offered a reassuring smile. "I'll keep my eyes open." Outside, the summer morning had blossomed into a perfect day, with clear blue skins and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. Sarah unlocked her bicycle and secured the delivery bags, then set off toward the Oakage Savings and Loan. As she pedaled down Main Street, her trained eyes noted 3 more Iron Skulls. Members positioned strategically around town, one leaning against the storefront smoking a cigarette, another sitting on his parked motorcycle watching the traffic, a third emerging from the hardware store with a paper bag that clinked with the sound of glass bottles. Setting up for arson, Sarah assessed the standard Iron Skulls tactic for businesses that refuse their protection. She completed her first 2 deliveries without incident, maintaining her cover as the unassuming delivery girl while cataloging every Iron Skull she spotted. By the time she reached Town Hall with the lunch order for the mayor's office, she had counted 12 members in total, a significant presence for a town the size of Oakage. Inside Town Hall, Sarah was greeted by Linda Parker, the mayor's administrative assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who missed nothing that happened in Oakage. "Right on time, as always, Sarah," Linda said, accepting the delivery bag. "Have you seen the commotion down at the festival grounds? Those motorcycle people are everywhere, making demands about where they can park during the event, trying to get vendor permits at the last minute." Sarah arranged her features into an expression of mild concern. "How many of them are there now?" Linda rolled her eyes. "At least a dozen that I've seen." "Mayor Thompson is beside himself. The summer festival brings in half our annual tourism revenue, and now these thugs are scaring people before it even starts." She lowered her voice. "Between you and me, Sheriff Collins is considering calling the state police for backup, but they're spread thin with that wildfire situation over in Bend." Sarah nodded sympathetically, probably just passing through for the festival. "Let's hope so." Linda sighed, then changed the subject. "How's your mother doing? I heard her arthritis has been acting up again." "Good days and bad days," Sarah replied, accepting the subtle shift to safer topics. "Today's one of the better ones." They chatted for a few more minutes before Sarah excused herself to continue her deliveries. As she wheeled her bicycle back onto Main Street, she noticed a new development. Raymond Thompson himself was now in town holding court outside the Rusty Nail with 4 of his lieutenants around him. The Iron Skull's leader looked even more imposing in daylight than he had in the forest darkness. Standing well over 6 feet tall with massive shoulders and arms like tree trunks, he dominated the sidewalk. His gray-streaked beard reached halfway down his chest, partially obscuring the Iron Skull's insignia on his leather vest. The skull tattoo on his forearm seemed to grin malevolently in the sunlight. Sarah kept her head down as she passed, but not before she noticed Thompson's eyes tracking her movement. Something in his gaze made her instincts flare. Not just the usual threat assessment a predator makes of potential prey, but something more focused, more specific. Did he know who she was? Had her cover been compromised, Sarah maintained her pace, giving no indication of her internal alert status. She completed her remaining deliveries with heightened awareness, noting that at each stop an Iron Skull member seemed to be watching from a distance. By mid-afternoon, she had mapped out their positions throughout town and identified their likely headquarters, the abandoned Oakage Mill warehouse on the edge of town, where motorcycle traffic had been steady all day. When she returned to Ruby's cafe, Marge was in a state of controlled fury. 3 more of them came by while you were out, she said, her voice tight. Asked if I'd considered their offer. Said they'd be back tonight after closing to discuss terms. Sarah unloaded her delivery bag. Did you call Sheriff Collins? For all the good it did, he came by, took a report, said he'd increase patrols. Marge made air quotes around the phrase. With what manpower, him and Deputy Richards against a dozen armed bikers? Maybe they're just trying to scare you, Sarah suggested, though she knew better. Marge shook her head. No, this is the real deal. My cousin owns a cafe over in Grants Pass. Same thing happened there last year. These gangs move in demand protection money, then start using local businesses to launder their drug money. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped down the counter. I'm not letting them take rubies. My mother built this place. Her mother before her. Sarah touched Marge's arm gently. No one's taking rubies, I promise. Something in Sarah's tone made Marge look up sharply, studying her employee's face with new awareness. Sarah, what exactly did you do before you came back to Oakage? Sarah maintained her cover seamlessly. Administrative work for a government contractor. Nothing exciting. Marge didn't appear convinced, but didn't press further. Well, whatever it was, I'm glad you're here now. There's something about you that makes a person feel safer. The rest of the afternoon passed in a tense holding pattern. News spread quickly through town about the Iron Skull's intimidation tactics. Several business owners reported similar protection offers. The hardware store, the pharmacy, even Doc Wilson's medical practice had received visits. By closing time, an unnatural quiet had settled over Oakage. The usual evening foot traffic on Main Street was absent, with most residents choosing to stay home rather than risk encountering the bikers who now seemed to be everywhere. As Sarah helped Marge close up rubies, she noticed Frank Weber walking past the cafe for the 3rd time in an hour. A clear signal that he was maintaining surveillance. Their eyes met briefly through the window, and he gave a subtle hand signal. 8 positions covered. Good. The veterans' network was in place. You should go home, Marge, Sarah said as they finished the closing routine. I can handle the final cleanup. Marge hesitated. Those bikers said they'd be coming by after closing. I'm not leaving you alone to deal with them. I'll be fine, Sarah assured her. I'll just tell them they need to talk to you tomorrow. Go home to Tom. I'll lock up properly. After several more minutes of persuasion, Marge reluctantly agreed and departed through the back door, promising to return first thing in the morning. As soon as she was gone, Sarah moved swiftly through the cafe, making subtle preparations that would appear normal to anyone watching, but gave her tactical advantages, adjusting the placement of tables to create clear lanes of movement, positioning heavy objects within easy reach, ensuring all potential weapons were accessible. She had just finished when headlights swept across the front windows as several motorcycles pulled up outside the cafe. Sarah positioned herself behind the counter, her right hand within inches of a heavy cast-iron skillet, her left close to the panic button Marge had installed years ago that connected directly to the sheriff's office. The door opened despite the closed sign clearly displayed, and Raymond Crusher Thompson entered, flanked by Deacon and two other iron skulls. They moved with the confident swagger of men accustomed to intimidating others simply by existing in the same space. Sarah maintained her delivery girl persona, letting a hint of nervousness show in her expression, just enough to seem authentic without appearing weak. "I'm sorry we're closed," she said, her voice steady but not challenging. Thompson's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "That's all right, darling. We're not here for coffee." His eyes scanned the cafe. "Where's the old lady who runs this place?" "Mrs. Wilson went home for the evening. If you'd like to leave a message, I can make sure she gets it tomorrow." Thompson stepped closer to the counter, using his bulk to loom over Sarah. Up close, his size was even more impressive, at least 6'4" and solid muscle beneath the layer of fat that comes with middle age. The skull tattoo on his forearm seemed to watch Sarah with its hollow eyes. "No message needed. We'll just have our conversation with you instead." He smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "What's your name, girl?" "Sarah." "Well, Sarah, here's how this works. Oakage is Iron Skull's territory now. Every business pays for protection. Insurance, you might say, against bad things happening." He glanced around the cafe appreciatively. "Nice place like this be a shame if there was a fire or if customers stopped coming because they got hurt on the premises." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I'm just an employee, Mr. Thompson, Ray Thompson, but everyone calls me Crusher." His smile widened for obvious reasons. "Mr. Thompson, I don't have any authority to make financial arrangements for rubies. You'll need to speak with Mrs. Wilson." Deacon stepped forward, his patience visibly thinning. "Listen, delivery girl, we're not asking. The protection fee is $2,000 a month, paid in cash starting tomorrow. You tell the old lady that." Sarah allowed herself to appear intimidated, lowering her eyes slightly. "I'll tell her." "Is there anything else?" Thompson studied her for a long moment, his expression suddenly thoughtful. "You look familiar. Have we crossed paths before?" A flash of alarm raced through Sarah's mind, carefully concealed behind her facade of nervousness. "I don't think so. I've lived in Oakage most of my life, except for a few years away for work." "What kind of work?" Thompson pressed. "Administrative government contractor filing mostly." Thompson continued to stare clearly, trying to place her face. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor, though her muscles had tensed imperceptibly, ready to move if necessary. Finally, he seemed to dismiss whatever thought had troubled him. "Will you make sure the old lady gets our message? We'll be back tomorrow for the first payment." He turned to leave, then stopped and added, "And Sarah, don't bother running to Sheriff Collins. Man's got a wife and 3 kids. Be ashamed if something happened to them because he stuck his nose where it doesn't belong." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah nodded once, playing her role to perfection. "I understand." Thompson and his men turned to leave, but as they reached the door, it swung open unexpectedly. Frank Weber stood in the doorway, his weathered face revealing nothing as he took in the scene. "Evening," Frank said mildly. "Just came by to check if Sarah needed a ride home. Her bicycle's got a flat tire." Thompson's eyes narrowed at the interruption. "And who might you be, old-timer?" "Just the handyman," Frank replied, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. "Frank Weber. I fix things around town." Deacon stepped forward aggressively. Well, Frank the handyman, you picked a bad time to play knight in shining armor. We're having a private business discussion here. Frank didn't budge from the doorway. Looks to me like the business is concluded. Place is closed after all. A tense silence filled the cafe as Thompson and Frank measured each other. Sarah recognized the moment for what it was. Two predators establishing territory. After several seconds, Thompson surprisingly was the first to back down with a dismissive laugh. Sure, we're done here for now. He gestured to his men, and they filed past Frank, deliberately bumping his shoulder on the way out. Thompson was the last to leave. He paused beside Frank and said quietly, "Word of advice, handyman. This town's changing ownership. Decide which side you want to be on before it's too late." Frank's expression remained impassive. "I'll keep that in mind." Only when the motorcycles had roared away did Frank step fully into the cafe, closing and locking the door behind him. He moved to the windows and adjusted the blinds to prevent anyone from seeing inside, then turned to Sarah. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, already moving from behind the counter. "They're setting up shop at the old mill warehouse. At least 20 of them now. Maybe more coming. Thompson recognized me, or thinks he did. Not sure yet." Frank's expression darkened. "That complicates things. What's your assessment?" "They're following their standard playbook. Intimidate the locals, established protection rackets, set up distribution channels for their product." Sarah crossed to the kitchen and retrieved her backpack from the storage locker. "DEA contact says earliest they can have a team here is 3 days from now." "Too long," Frank said flatly. "Once they're entrenched, getting them out becomes a siege operation. Civilian casualties likely." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's why we need to delay them, disrupt their setup until backup arrives." She pulled out a small encrypted phone from her backpack. "I've activated the local network. Bill Henderson's watching the North Road. Doc Wilson is coordinating communications. Jim Parker's got the west approach covered." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Parker, the school principal. Force Recon. 2 tours in Iraq." A ghost of a smile touched Frank's lips. "This town's full of surprises." His expression turned serious again. "What's your play for tonight?" Sarah checked her watch. "Reconnaissance. I need to get eyes on that warehouse, confirm their numbers and resources, identify vulnerabilities we can exploit. Not alone." "You're not," Frank stated firmly. "I'm coming with you." Sarah started to object, then reconsidered. Despite his age, Frank Weber was still one of the most capable operators she'd ever known, and having backup would significantly reduce the risk. "All right, meet me at the old fire road behind Peterson's farm at 2300 hours. Dark clothing, basic kit only." Frank nodded and moved toward the door. "Be careful getting home. They've got people watching the main roads." After Frank left, Sarah completed the closing procedures and exited through the back door, securing it behind her. Rather than taking her usual row at home, she wheeled her bicycle through the alley behind Main Street, using the darkness and her knowledge of Oakage's back roads to avoid potential observers. When she arrived home, Eleanor was waiting in the kitchen, a shotgun resting across her lap. "You're late," Eleanor said, her voice tight with concern. "Got held up." Sarah secured the door and moved to the window to check the street outside. The Iron Skulls paid rubies a visit, made their protection pitch. Eleanor's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Are they watching the house? Possibly. I took the long way home, but we should assume they're keeping an eye on key locations." Sarah turned to face her mother. "I need to go back out tonight." "Reconnaissance. Of course you do," Eleanor said with a bong that contained equal parts resignation and pride. "Your father was the same way. Never could stay out of the fight." Sarah checked her watch. She had 3 hours before meeting Frank. "I need to prep, then I'll help you to bed before I go." Eleanor waved off the offer. "I'm not an invalid yet." Go do what you need to do. Just, she hesitated, then added softly, come back in one piece. Sarah moved to her mother's side and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Always do. In the basement, Sarah changed into dark tactical clothing, black cargo pants, a close-fitting long-sleeve shirt, and soft-soled boots. She selected equipment with practice efficiency, a combat knife, and an ankle sheath, a small flashlight with red filter communication earpiece, the Glock 19, and a shoulder holster and extra magazines. She was securing the holster when her encrypted phone vibrated. The message was from Bill Henderson. 8 new bikes arrived at warehouse. Armed guards posted at all entrances. Sarah frowned at the information. The Iron Skulls were moving faster than anticipated, building up their presence more quickly than their usual pattern. Something was driving their accelerated timeline. Perhaps Thompson's federal indictment. Perhaps something else she wasn't yet aware of. At 10:45 p.m., Sarah slipped out of her house through the basement's concealed exit, a narrow tunnel that led to an abandoned well house 50 yards from the main building. She moved through the darkness with practiced ease, avoiding the main roads and using the cover of trees and structures to mask her approach to the meeting point. Frank was already waiting when she arrived, a shadow among shadows at the edge of the tree-line. He wore dark clothing similar to Sarah's, and the outline of a holstered weapon was visible beneath his jacket. Clear route to the warehouse through the old logging trail, he reported, without preamble. Bill's in position on the North Ridge with optics. Doc's monitoring police channels from his home office. Sarah nodded. Let's move. Maintain distance. Communicate by hand signals only, unless absolutely necessary. They traveled in silence through the forest that bordered the eastern edge of Oak Ridge, moving with the practiced stealth of experienced operators. Despite his age, Frank kept pace easily, his movements economical and precise. The abandoned mill warehouse came into view after 20 minutes of careful navigation. A massive concrete and metal structure that had once been the economic heart of Oak Ridge, before the logging industry's decline. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with rusted barbed wire that had long since lost its deterrent value. Sarah and Frank took up observation positions on a wooded hillside overlooking the warehouse complex. From this vantage point, they could see the entire facility, while remaining concealed among the trees. The Iron Skulls had established a significant presence. 25 motorcycles were parked in formation near the main entrance. Floodlights had been mounted on the exterior walls, illuminating the perimeter. Armed guards, visible from their position, patrolled the fence line. Most concerning was the activity at the loading dock. A large semi-truck had backed up to the main doors, and Iron Skulls members were unloading crates and moving them inside. Even from a distance, the operation had the hallmarks of a major distribution setup. Sarah and Frank observed in silence for nearly an hour, noting patrol patterns, identifying key personnel, and assessing defensive positions. They had just begun to withdraw when a new development caught their attention. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the warehouse yard. 4 men emerged, not dressed in typical Iron Skulls attire, but in dark suits that suggested cartel connections. Raymond Thompson himself came out to greet them, accompanied by Deacon and several heavily armed guards. Escalation. Frank whispered, his voice barely audible. Cartel representatives don't show up for routine deliveries. Sarah nodded grimly. They're setting up something big, using the summer festival as cover. They watched as Thompson led the visitors inside. Whatever was happening in that warehouse went beyond the Iron Skull's typical operations. This was a major expansion, possibly with international connections. As they began their careful withdrawal, Sarah's instincts suddenly flared. She froze, signaling Frank to do the same. For several seconds, nothing moved except the guards visible at the warehouse. Then she saw a subtle shift in the shadows about 70 yards to their right. Someone else was watching the warehouse. Sarah signaled to Frank, indicating the position. He acknowledged with a slight nod, then began a wide flanking movement through the trees while Sarah maintained observation. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Then Frank's voice came through her earpiece, so soft it was barely audible. Sheriff Collins, alone conducting his own reconnaissance. Sarah processed this information quickly. Sheriff Collins was a decent lawman, but he had no tactical training for this kind of situation. If the Iron Skulls spotted him, he'd be dead before he could call for backup. She made a quick decision, signaling Frank to hold position while she circled around behind the sheriff's location. Moving like a ghost through the underbrush, she approached until she was just a few yards behind Collins, who was peering at the warehouse through binoculars, completely unaware of her presence. "Don't move, Sheriff," she whispered close enough that he could hear, but not so loud that the sound would carry to the guards below. Collins stiffened, but had the good sense not to spin around or make a sudden movement. "Who's there?" he whispered back. "A friend. You need to withdraw. Now, you're in over your head." The sheriff remained frozen, binoculars still raised. "Those bastards threaten my family, threaten my town. I need evidence of what they're doing." "You'll get your evidence," Sarah assured him. "But not tonight, and not like this. If they spot you, they'll kill you without hesitation." For a tense moment, Collins seemed to consider arguing. Then his shoulders slumped slightly. "How do I get out of here without being seen?" "Wait 30 seconds after I'm gone. Then move directly west, staying low in the HYN. There's a man in a dark jacket who will guide you back to the fire road." "Who are you people?" Collins asked, still not turning around. Sarah was already moving away. "Just concerned citizens, Sheriff. We'll be in touch." She melted back into the forest before Collins could respond. Through her earpiece, Frank confirmed that he had made contact with the sheriff and was escorting him safely away from the warehouse. Sarah continued her observation for another 15 minutes, gathering final details about the Iron Skulls operation. The cartel representatives emerged from the warehouse with Thompson, shook hands, and departed in their SUV. Whatever business they had concluded appeared to have gone well, judging by Thompson's satisfied expression. By the time Sarah rendezvoused with Frank at their extraction point, she had formulated the beginnings of a plan not to take down the Iron Skulls that would require federal resources, but to disrupt their operation long enough for those resources to arrive. "Collins is secure," Frank reported. "Sent him home with a warning to stay put and protect his family." Sarah nodded. "Good. We need to gather the network tonight." Frank raised an eyebrow. "That's serious. Worse than we thought," Sarah confirmed. "That wasn't just a drug delivery. They're setting up a major distribution hub with cartel connections. And based on what I saw, they're planning something specific during the summer festival. Doc Wilson's house." Frank suggested his basement has secure access through the storm cellar and his wife's visiting their daughter in Portland. 1 hour, Sarah agreed. "I'll contact the others." They separated, taking different routes back toward town to minimize the chance of detection. Sarah moved through the darkness with heightened awareness, her mind processing everything she had observed at the warehouse. The Iron Skulls were establishing a stronger presence in Oak Ridge than she had initially assessed. Their accelerated timeline and the cartel connection suggested something beyond their usual operation. And most concerning, they had specifically targeted Ruby's Café Marge, and by extension, Sarah herself. Whatever was coming, it would arrive soon. And Sarah Miller, the unassuming delivery girl from Ruby's Cafe, would be at the center of the storm. As she slipped through the shadows of the sleeping town, Sarah's resolve hardened. Oak Ridge was her home. These people were under her protection, and the Iron Skulls were about to learn a painful lesson about underestimating their opponents. Thompson's words from earlier echoed in her mind. This town's changing ownership. No, Sarah thought grimly. Not while I'm here. Doc Wilson's house sat on a quiet street blocks from Main Street, a well-maintained Victorian with a wraparound porch and meticulous landscaping that gave no hint of the high-tech security system concealed within its historic facade. As the town's only physician for 30 years, Doc had earned the community's respect. Few knew that before settling in Oakridge, he had served as a combat medic with SEAL Team 6 in operations that remain classified to this day. Sarah approached from the rear, using the cover of mature oak trees to reach the storm cellar entrance without being observed. A soft tap on the metal doors in a specific pattern caused them to unlock with a barely audible click. Inside Doc's basement had been converted into a combination medical office and secure meeting room. Communications equipment lined one wall. A fully stocked medical station occupied another, and a large table with chairs dominated the center of the space. Frank was already there, along with Bill Henderson and Jim Parker. Doc Wilson himself was monitoring a bank of screens showing security camera feeds from various locations around Oakridge, including several Sheriff hadn't known existed. Sheriff's Home Safe Doc reported, without turning from his monitors. And our friends at the warehouse are still busy unloading that truck. Sarah set her backpack on the table. What's our total count now? 28 confirmed Iron Skulls. Bill Henderson answered his weathered farmer's hand, spreading a map of Oakridge across the table. 4 at the Rusty Nail, 6 at the Oakridge Motel, the rest at the warehouse, plus those cartel representatives who arrived in the SUV. Jim Parker, the elementary school principal, whose military bearing was usually concealed beneath tweed jackets and friendly smiles, pointed to various locations on the map. They've established observation points here, here, and here. Main roads covered. They're watching key businesses, including Ruby's. Sarah absorbed this information mentally, overlaying it with what she had observed herself. They're moving faster than their usual pattern, setting up for something specific. The summer festival, Frank suggested, 3 days of tourist money flowing freely, perfect cover for major drug distribution in a captive market, Doc added grimly. 8,000 visitors expected, according to the Chamber of Commerce. Sarah leaned over the map, studying it intently. We need to disrupt their timeline, slow them down until federal support arrives. Direct confrontation is out, Bill stated flatly. We're outnumbered and outgunned, and we need to keep civilians safe, Jim added. Most people in town have no idea what's really happening. Sarah nodded in agreement. We use guerrilla tactics, targeted disruption of their operation without revealing ourselves, delay and distract until the DEA can mobilize. For the next hour, they formulated a plan not to defeat the Iron Skulls outright, but to interfere with their operation just enough to prevent them from establishing a foothold before federal authorities could arrive. Each member of the network would play to their strengths, using their knowledge of Oakridge and their specialized skills to create problems for the invaders. By the time Sarah left Doc's house, a careful strategy had been established. The veterans would begin implementation at first light, while Sarah maintained her cover at Ruby's Cafe, gathering intelligence from the center of town. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Sarah slipping back into her house through the concealed entrance. She secured her equipment in the hidden room, changed into her normal clothes, and emerged into the kitchen to find Eleanor already awake and making coffee. You look tired, Eleanor observed, sliding a mug across the counter. Sarah accepted it gratefully. Long night productive? Yes, we have a plan. Eleanor nodded, asking no further questions. After decades as a military wife and then a military mother, she understood the value of the operational security. Your shift starts in an hour, she said instead. "I'll make you some breakfast." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Thanks, Mom." As she ate the simple meal of eggs and toast, Sarah mentally prepared for the day ahead. The Iron Skulls would be making their move soon, expecting to encounter nothing but frightened townspeople and an overwhelmed sheriff. Instead, they would find their operation subtly but persistently hampered by an invisible resistance. And at the center of it all would be Sarah Miller, the unassuming delivery girl from Ruby's Cafe, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The morning dawned clear and bright, with a freshness in the air that belied the tension gripping Oakage. Sarah arrived at Ruby's Cafe 15 minutes early, as was her habit, to find Marge already inside, pacing nervously. "Thank goodness you're here," Marge said, relief evident in her voice. "Did those men come back after I left last night?" Sarah nodded, keeping her demeanor calm as she hung up her jacket. "They did. Made their pitch about protection money. $2,000 a month." Marge's face flushed with anger. $2,000. That's more than our monthly profit. Did you tell them we'd call the sheriff? They specifically warned against that." Sarah replied, moving behind the counter to start the coffee. "Threatened? Sheriff Collins' family." Marge sank onto a stool, her expression shifting from anger to fear. "What are we going to do? The summer festival starts tomorrow. The whole town will be full of visitors." "We buy time," Sarah said simply. "Tell them you're considering their offer. Ask for a few days to get the money together." And then, what Sarah met Marge's eyes. And then we see what happens. Something in Sarah's steady gaze seemed to reassure Marge. She straightened her shoulders and nodded. "All right, we buy time." The cafe opened at 6:00 a.m. as usual, but the morning unfolded in a way that was anything but normal. The regular breakfast crowd was noticeably thinner, with many locals choosing to stay home rather than venture into a town increasingly dominated by leather-clad bikers. Those who did come to Ruby's spoke in hushed tones about the Iron Skull's presence. Sheriff Collins had apparently made calls to neighboring jurisdictions for support, but with the summer festival beginning the next day and resources already stretched thin across the region, help would be limited at best. By mid-morning, the plan that Sarah and the veterans had put together began to show results. Bill Henderson reported that the Iron Skull's fuel supply at the warehouse had mysteriously been contaminated overnight, disabling several of their motorcycles. Jim Parker, using his authority, a school principal, had convinced the town council to implement emergency safety protocols for the festival, resulting in increased private security presence that would complicate the Iron Skull's planned drug distribution. Most effective was Doc Wilson's contribution as a town physician. He had discreetly informed state health inspectors about potential contamination concerns at the Rusty Nail, the bar the Iron Skulls had claimed as their in-town base. The resulting surprise inspection and temporary closure order had thrown their communications into disarray. Sarah monitored these developments while maintaining her delivery girl routine, circulating through town with Ruby's food orders and gathering intelligence. The Iron Skulls were visible everywhere now, their frustration evident as their carefully planned operation encountered unexpected obstacles. Around noon, Sarah was loading her bicycle for a delivery run when a black motorcycle pulled up directly in front of Ruby's. The rider, a woman Sarah hadn't seen before removed her helmet to reveal short dark hair and hard eyes. She wore the Iron Skull's colors, but with a patch that identified her as property of Crusher Thompson's woman. She entered the cafe and approached the counter where Marge was working. "You Sarah?" she asked bluntly. Sarah straightened from her bicycle. "That's me." The woman's eyes performed a quick assessment, clearly unimpressed by what she saw. "Kusher wants to see you now." Marge stepped forward protectively. "She's working. We have deliveries to make." The woman ignored Marge, keeping her eyes fixed on Sarah. "It wasn't a request. His bike's outside." You're riding with me to the warehouse." Sarah maintained her delivery girl persona, allowing a flicker of fear to show on her face. "Why does he want to see me?" "Not my job to explain. My job is to bring you in." The woman's hand moved slightly, revealing the outline of a weapon beneath her leather jacket. "One way or another." Sarah made a show of hesitation, then nodded reluctantly. "Let me tell my boss where I'm going." She turned to Marge, whose face had gone pale with worry. "It's okay," Sarah said quietly. "I'll go see what he wants, and be back soon." Marge clutched Sarah's arm. "You don't have to go with her." "Yes, she does," the woman interjected. "Unless you want your cute little cafe to burn down tonight." Sarah gently disengaged from Marge's grip. "It's better if I go. I'll be fine." The confidence in Sarah's voice was genuine, though not for the reasons Marge might have assumed. This unexpected summons was actually an opportunity, a chance to gather intelligence from inside the Iron Skull's base of operations. Outside, Sarah reluctantly climbed onto the motorcycle behind the woman, who introduced herself curtly as Viper. As they roared away from Ruby's, Sarah's mind was already mapping the route and assessing potential escape routes should the situation deteriorate. The warehouse appeared much different in daylight than it had during her nighttime reconnaissance. The Iron Skulls had established a formidable presence, with armed guards visibly patrolling the perimeter and motorcycles lined up in military precision near the main entrance. Viper drove directly to a side door, where two guards nodded them through without comment. Inside, the cavernous space had been transformed into a combination staging area and living quarters. One section contained neat rows of crates, the drug shipment Sarah had observed being unloaded the night before. Another held sleeping bags and personal belongings for the Iron Skull's members. A third area had been set up as a command center with maps and communications equipment. Raymond Thompson sat at a table in this command area studying what appeared to be plans for the summer festival grounds. He looked up as Viper led Sarah forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The delivery girl, as requested," Viper announced, then took up a position near the door. Thompson gestured to a chair across from him. "Sit down, Sarah." Sarah complied, maintaining her nervous demeanor, while her trained eyes catalogued everything around her personnel positions. Weapons, exits, potential improvised weapons within reach. "Do you know why I wanted to see you?" Thompson asked, his voice deceptively casual. Sarah shook her head. "No, sir." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "You're not what you seem, are you?" A flash of genuine alarm raced through Sarah's mind. Had her cover been compromised, she maintained her confused expression. "I don't understand." "Sure you do." Thompson reached into a folder beside him and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the table. "That's you, isn't it?" Sarah looked down at the image and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The photograph showed her in military uniform, receiving a commendation from a high-ranking officer. It was from early in her career before her classified work, but it was unmistakably her younger haircut in military regulation, but her face clearly recognizable. She kept her expression neutral. "Where did you get this?" Thompson smiled coldly. "Let's just say the Iron Skulls have friends in interesting places, including some who keep tabs on certain government employees." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Her classified work had been carefully compartmentalized, her identity protected. But her earlier military service was a matter of public record, if someone knew where to look. "That was a long time ago," she said carefully. "I left the service years ago." Maybe Thompson didn't sound convinced, but it does make me wonder what a former Army officer is doing delivering sandwiches in a town like Oakridge, especially when that town suddenly starts having problems right after we arrive. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I came back to take care of my mother. That's all." Thompson studied her for a long moment, then abruptly changed tactics. Here's what I think. I think you're more than you appear to be, and that makes you either a problem, he paused meaningfully, or an asset. An asset. Smart woman like you with military training knows how things work, knows when to look the other way, could be valuable to an organization like ours. Thompson leaned forward. The Iron Skulls reward loyalty very generously. Sarah realized he was attempting to recruit her, or at least to determine whether she could be bought off. She decided to play along, seeing an opportunity to gather more intelligence. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, allowing a hint of interest to creep into her voice. Thompson seemed pleased by her response. "Simple. You do what you're already doing. That deliver food, move around town freely, keep your eyes and ears open, but you do it for us. Let us know if the sheriff is planning anything, if any strangers come to town asking questions, and in return, $500 a week, cash, plus a percentage of certain business transactions once we're established here." Sarah pretended to consider the offer, buying time to observe more of the warehouse operation. "That's a lot of money, just for information." "Information is valuable in our line of work." Thompson gestured around the warehouse. "What do you see here, Sarah?" "A successful motorcycle club," she replied carefully. Thompson laughed. "A successful business enterprise, one that's about to expand significantly. Oak Ridge is strategically located, isolated enough to operate without big city police interference, but connected enough to serve as a distribution hub for the entire region. And the Summer Festival. Perfect cover. Thousands of visitors, cash flowing freely. Local law enforcement overwhelmed." Thompson's expression hardened. "But I need to know if you're with us or against us, and I need to know now." Sarah made a show of internal struggle before answering. "I need to think about it. This is a lot to process." Thompson's face darkened. "That's not how this works. You're either in or you're out. And if you're out," he let the threat hang unspoken. Sarah nodded slowly. "I understand. It's just, I've never done anything like this before. First time for everything." Thompson stood, signaling that the meeting was over. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Come back here with your answer." And Sarah, his voice dropped to a menacing rumble, "Don't get any ideas about going to the sheriff. We have people watching him and you around the clock." As Viper escorted Sarah back outside to the motorcycle, Sarah maintained her facade of nervous consideration. But internally, her tactical mind was processing everything she had seen inside the warehouse. The layout, the number of guards, the location of the drug shipment, the communications equipment, all valuable intelligence for what was coming next. The ride back to town was conducted in silence. Viper dropped Sarah off in front of Ruby's cafe with a final warning. "Tomorrow morning, don't be late." As the motorcycle roared away, Sarah noted Frank Weber across the street, ostensibly fixing a storefront sign, but clearly monitoring the situation. She gave him a subtle hand signal. Information obtained no immediate threat. Inside, Ruby's Marge rushed forward with relief evident on her face. "Thank God you're all right. What did they want? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," Sarah assured her. "They wanted to offer me a job working for them instead of the cafe." Marge's expression shifted from relief to outrage. "The nerve, first they threaten us. Now they try to steal my employees." Sarah guided Marge toward the back of the cafe, away from the windows. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to trust me." For the next 10 minutes, Sarah explained as much as she could without revealing her classified background, that she had military training, that she and several other veterans in town were working to disrupt the Iron Skull's operations, and that federal help was on the way but wouldn't arrive for another 2 days. Marge listened with growing astonishment. "So all this time, you've been what, some kind of undercover agent. Nothing that dramatic, Sarah lied smoothly. Just someone with the right training to handle this situation. But I need your help. Anything. Marge said firmly. This is my town too. We need to keep the cafe running normally. Act as if nothing has changed. And tomorrow, when the festival starts, I need you to be somewhere safe. Marge straightened her spine. This is my cafe. I'm not abandoning it. Sarah recognized the stubborn determination in the older woman's eyes. Then we'll make sure you're protected, but you need to follow my instructions exactly if things get dangerous. Promise me. After a moment's hesitation, Marge nodded. I promise. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Sarah completed her delivery routes, gathering intelligence and passing coded messages to the Veterans Network. The disruptions they had orchestrated were having the desired effect. The Iron Skulls were behind schedule, their operations hampered by mechanical failures, unexpected inspections, and logistical complications. By evening, the tension in Oakage had reached a breaking point. Main Street was virtually deserted, except for Iron Skull's members who now patrolled openly. Sheriff Collins had established a command post at Town Hall, but with only 3 deputies from neighboring jurisdictions as reinforcement, his ability to confront the gang was severely limited. As Sarah helped Marge close Ruby's for the night, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. Tomorrow was the first day of the summer festival. Thousands of visitors would pour into Oakage, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the surface of the cheerful small-town celebration. "Will you be all right getting home?" Marge asked, as they stepped outside, her eyes darting nervously toward a pair of Iron Skulls watching from across the street. "I'll be fine," Sarah assured her. "Frank's giving me a ride." As if on cue, Frank's battered pickup truck pulled up to the curb. Sarah climbed in, giving Marge a reassuring wave as they drove away. "Thompson made you," Frank said without preamble, once they were clear of Main Street. "How bad?" "He has a photo from my Army days, knows I have military background, but doesn't seem aware of my classified work." Sarah glanced out of the window, checking for tails. "He tried to recruit me. Wants an answer by tomorrow morning." Frank's weathered face remained impassive. "That buys us some time. What's your play? String him along. Make him think I'm considering the offer. Meanwhile, we continue the disruption campaign." Sarah turned to face Frank directly. "What's our status?" "Bill disabled their communications relay at the warehouse. Doc's got 3 more veterans arriving tonight, friends from his SEAL days who were vacationing in Portland. Jim's coordinated with the festival security team to concentrate on the areas we know they're planning to use for distribution." "Good. And the DEA still on schedule for tomorrow night. Tactical team assembling in Eugene right now." Sarah nodded, formulating the next phase of their plan. "Tomorrow morning I go back to Thompson as requested. Tell him I need more time to decide. That should keep him focused on me while you and the others continue the disruption operations." Frank gave her a sharp look. "That's high risk. He might decide you're not worth the trouble." "It's a calculated risk," Sarah countered, "and it gives us the best chance of keeping civilians safe during the festival." They drove in silence for a few moments before Frank spoke again. "You know, this town's been a sanctuary for people like us, a place to leave the war behind." Sarah understood exactly what he meant. Oakage had become a haven for veterans seeking peace after years of combat. A quiet corner of the world where they could use their skills to build rather than destroy. "Some wars find you no matter how far you run," she said softly. Frank nodded grimly. "At least this time we're fighting for our own ground." When they reached Sarah's house, Frank didn't immediately drive away. "You want me to keep watch tonight?" he offered. Sarah shook her head. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll be active." Inside, Sarah found Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning a revolver with practiced hands. She looked up as Sarah entered, her expression. "A question." "It's happening," Sarah confirmed. "Festival starts tomorrow. The Iron Skulls are planning to use it as cover for a major distribution operation." Eleanor continued her methodical cleaning. "And you're right in the middle of it, as usual." "Not by choice," Sarah said, pouring herself a glass of water. "It's always by choice, Sarah." Eleanor set the revolver down carefully. "You could have walked away, called the FBI, and let them handle it. But you didn't." Sarah sank into a chair across from her mother. "They wouldn't have gotten here in time. Maybe. Or maybe you needed this." Eleanor's eyes, so similar to Sarah's own, held no judgment, only understanding. "Some people are built for the fight. Your father was. I think you are too." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Her mother's assessment cut close to a truth she had been avoiding since leaving her classified work. The quiet life in Oak Ridge had been peaceful, but something had always been missing, the sense of purpose that came with using her skills to protect others. "Get some sleep," Eleanor said, rising from the table with a slight whis as her arthritis protested the movement. "Something tells me you'll need it tomorrow." Sarah nodded, helping her mother to her bedroom before conducting her nightly security check of the house. In the basement, she prepared her equipment for the next day, checking weapons, charging communications devices, laying out tactical gear that could be quickly accessed if needed. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation to a head. The Iron Skulls, frustrated by the disruptions to their operation, impressed by Thompson's need to establish a new base quickly, would almost certainly escalate their intimidation tactics. And Sarah would be at the center of it all, walking a dangerous line between gathering intelligence and maintaining her increasingly tenuous cover. As she finally lay down to sleep, Sarah's mind continued to process contingencies and tactical options. The Iron Skulls had chosen Oak Ridge because they thought it was defenseless, a small town with minimal law enforcement and a population too frightened to resist. They had no idea they had invaded a town that housed more combat veterans per capita than almost anywhere in Oregon. Veterans who had found peace, but had not forgotten how to fight. And at the center of that resistance, a delivery girl who was far more than she appeared to be. Tomorrow, the Iron Skulls would begin to understand their mistake. And Raymond Crusher Thompson would learn that some small towns were not as defenseless as they seemed. Sarah Miller, delivery girl, former Delta Force operator, protector of Oak Ridge, closed her eyes and prepared for the battle to come. Dawn broke over Oak Ridge with a golden light that belied the tension gripping the small town. The first day of the summer festival had arrived, and with it, the deadline for Sarah's answer to Thompson's offer. Sarah rose before sunrise, moving through her morning routine with the focused precision of someone preparing for combat. She dressed in her usual Ruby's Cafe uniform, jeans, t-shirt, blue cap. But beneath the ordinary appearance, she had prepared for multiple contingencies. The combat knife in her ankle sheath, the slim Kevlar vest under her shirt, the encrypted phone in her pocket linked to the veterans' network. In the kitchen, Eleanor was already awake, her arthritis apparently giving her less trouble this morning. She handed Sarah a mug of coffee without comment, her eyes saying everything that needed to be said between them. "I might be late tonight," Sarah said, breaking the silence. Eleanor nodded. "I'll keep the porch light on." It was a ritual they had observed throughout Sarah's military career. A simple phrase that carried the weight of all their unspoken fears and hopes. Keep the light on. Come home safe. Sarah left the house as the first festival volunteers began setting up booths along Main Street. The normally quiet thoroughfare was transforming into a bustling marketplace, with colorful banners strung between lampposts, in temporary stages being assembled at either end. The Iron Skulls were already visible pairs of leather-clad bikers stationed at strategic points throughout the festival grounds, watching the preparations with predatory interest. Sarah counted 12 members within her line of sight as she walked toward the warehouse where Thompson awaited her answer. She had chosen to walk rather than cycle, a tactical decision that gave her more mobility options should the situation deteriorate. As she approached this warehouse, she noted the increased security. 4 guards now patrolled the perimeter fence, all visibly armed. At the gate, Viper was waiting for her. Right on time, the woman observed her hard eyes assessing Sarah with renewed interest. Crushers waiting inside. Sarah followed Viper through the compound, using the opportunity to update her mental map of the Iron Skulls operation. The disruptions orchestrated by the Veterans Network had clearly had an impact. Motorcycles sat idle with parts removed. Communication equipment lay partially disassembled on workbenches, and the atmosphere among the gang members was one of simmering frustration. Thompson was in the same command area as before, examining a large map of the festival grounds with Deacon and 2 other lieutenants. He looked up as Sarah approached, dismissing the others with a curt nod. "Decision time," he said without preamble. Sarah had carefully planned her approach. Not an outright refusal, which would likely result in immediate violence but not acceptance either. A middle ground that would buy more time. "I'm interested," she said, keeping her voice steady, "but I have conditions." Thompson's eyebrows rose in surprise. Then he let out a bark of laughter. "Conditions? You've got nerve. I'll give you that." He gestured to a chair across from him. "Let's hear them." Sarah, maintaining the careful balance between confidence and deference that would keep him engaged rather than angered. "First, Ruby's Cafe stays protected. No fees, no harassment. Second, I need to know exactly what information you want me to provide. And third, I want payment up front, half of the first month's salary today." Thompson studied her with narrowed eyes, clearly reassessing her. "You're either very brave or very stupid coming in here and making demands." "Just practical," Sarah replied evenly. "If we're going to work together, we need clear terms." For a long moment, tension hung in the air between them. Then Thompson surprised her by nodding slowly. "The cafe gets protection free of charge. You provide information on police movements, any feds who show up asking questions, and anything suspicious happening in town." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a thick envelope. $250 now, the rest at the end of the week, assuming you deliver." Sarah accepted the envelope, using the moment to scan the room again. The command center had been rearranged since her previous visit. Communication equipment, consolidated new maps added to the walls, additional weapons visible on a nearby table. "There's one more thing," Thompson said, his tone shifting slightly. "I want you to make a special delivery for us today during the festival." Sarah maintained her neutral expression. "What kind of delivery?" "Nothing complicated, just a package that needs to reach a buyer." Thompson slid a small box across the table. "Drop point is the blue tent at the south end of the festival grounds. You'll be approached by a man in a gray suit who will ask if you have a special order from Rye. Hand him this. Get the envelope he gives you in return." Sarah picked up the box. Lightweight, about the size of a deck of cards. Almost certainly a sample of whatever drug shipment the Iron Skulls were planning to distribute through Oakidge. "Seems simple enough," she said, pocketing the box. "When noon exactly, don't be late, and don't get curious about what's inside." Thompson's expression hardened. "Consider this your loyalty test. Pass it. You're part of the family. Fail." He left the thread unspoken. Sarah nodded her understanding. Noon, blue tent man in gray suit, asking for a special order. Good girl. Thompson's condescending tone made Sarah's combat instincts flare, but she kept her reaction carefully controlled. Now get back to that cafe of yours. Keep your eyes and ears open. Report anything unusual." As Viper escorted her back to the gate, Sarah's mind was already formulating the next phase of her plan. The delivery assignment was both a complication and an opportunity. A chance to identify the Iron Skull's local buyer while also gathering evidence of their drug operation. Once clear of the warehouse, Sarah took an indirect route back toward town, using the cover of trees along the road to ensure she wasn't being followed. When she was confident of her privacy, she retrieved her encrypted phone and sent a brief message to the Veterans Network. Package intercept. Blue tent, South Festival ground, noon, gray suit. The response came seconds later. Acknowledged assets in position. By the time Sarah reached Ruby's Cafe, the festival was in full swing. Main Street had been transformed into a vibrant marketplace, with food vendors, craft booths, and local musicians creating a carnival atmosphere. Tourists and locals alike filled the sidewalks, most unaware of the dangerous undercurrents flowing beneath the cheerful surface of the celebration. Marge looked up with relief as Sarah entered the cafe, which was doing brisk business despite the outdoor festivities. "Thank heavens," she said, rushing over. "I was worried when you didn't show up for your shift." "Sorry," Sarah replied, moving behind the counter to grab her apron. "Had some business to take care of. How's it going here?" "Busy, thank God. The festival crowd always brings in good business." Marge lowered her voice. "Any developments?" Sarah glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Things are moving. Stay alert, but act normal. And whatever happens, stay inside the cafe this afternoon." Marge's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded her understanding. "Be careful, Sarah." The morning passed in a whirlwind of activity as Sarah maintained her cover serving customers and making local deliveries while continuously scanning for Iron Skull's members and updating her mental map of their positions throughout town. The gang had established a significant presence at the festival, with members patrolling in pairs, ostensibly maintaining order, but actually laying the groundwork for their distribution operation. Through subtle signals and brief encounters, Sarah coordinated with the Veterans Network. Frank Weber, posing as festival maintenance staff, confirmed that the South End Blue Tent had been placed under surveillance. Bill Henderson, selling produce from his farm at a nearby booth, had identified 3 more Iron Skull's members posing as festival-goers. Doc Wilson, volunteering at the first aid station, had his medical bag packed with more than just bandages and antiseptic. At 11:30, Sarah prepared for the delivery Thompson had assigned her. She informed Marge she was taking her lunch break, then slipped out the back door of the cafe, circling around to approach the festival grounds from a direction where she wouldn't be easily observed by the Iron Skulls stationed on Main Street. The blue tent was exactly where Thompson had indicated, at the south end of the festival grounds, slightly separated from the main cluster of vendor booths. It displayed a banner advertising Crystal Creations handcrafted jewelry. But Sarah noticed there were few actual products on display, and the middle-aged woman manning the tent seemed tense and distracted. Sarah positioned herself at a food vendor across from the tent, buying a lemonade to justify her presence while observing the area. At 11:55, she spotted Frank Weber moving equipment nearby, his casual demeanor belying his tactical awareness. A subtle hand signal confirmed that he had the situation under surveillance. At precisely noon, a man in a gray suit appeared, making his way purposefully through the crowd toward the blue tent. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Sarah's trained eye immediately identified him as law enforcement. The way he scanned the crowd, the subtle bulge of a concealed weapon under his jacket, the communications device in his ear. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a drug buyer. This was a setup. The man in the gray suit approached the blue tent, speaking briefly with the woman, before turning to scan the crowd. His eyes passed over Sarah without recognition, then continued searching. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Thompson had given her a package to deliver to a law enforcement officer, possibly an undercover DEA agent or state police. Was it a test of trap? Or had Thompson somehow identified her as a former federal operative and was setting her up to be caught in a drug transaction? She needed to abort the delivery without revealing that she had recognized the trap. Catching Frank's eyes, she gave the hand signal for mission compromise. He acknowledged with a subtle nod, then moved away, presumably to alert the rest of the network. Sarah turned away from the blue tent and began walking unhurriedly toward the north end of the festival, maintaining a casual pace that wouldn't attract attention. She had taken only a few steps when a heavy hand fell on her shoulder. "Going somewhere, delivery girl." Deacon's voice was low and menacing. He stood directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck. "Just getting some lunch before heading back to work," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "Funny. Thought you had a delivery to make first." Deacon's grip tightened painfully. "Crusher's going to be real disappointed." Sarah's combat instincts assessed the situation in milliseconds. Deacon was armed. She could feel the hard outline of a weapon pressed against her side. They were surrounded by festival-goers, including many children. Any confrontation here would endanger civilians. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said calmly. "I was just about to make the delivery." Deacon's laugh was cold. "Save it. We've been watching you. Saw you recognize our friend in the gray suit." His voice dropped even lower. "Turns out you're not the only one who can play undercover delivery girl. Or should I say, Sergeant Miller." The use of her former military rank confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Somehow Thompson had connected more dots than she had anticipated. The delivery had been a test, and she had failed. "Let's go have a chat with Crusher." Deacon continued, beginning to steer her through the crowd. "He's real interested in why a former Delta Force operator is delivering sandwiches in Oakridge." Sarah allowed herself to be guided, her mind calculating buns. Making a scene in the middle of the crowded festival would endanger civilians. Going with Deacon might give her an opportunity to gather more intelligence and potentially access the heart of the Iron Skull's operation. Her network knew her last position and would track her movement. As they walked, Sarah spotted Bill Henderson watching from his produce stand and gave him the distress signal they had established. His almost imperceptible nod told her the message was received. The network would now activate their contingency plan. Deacon led her to a black SUV parked at the edge of the festival grounds. 2 more Iron Skulls were waiting, both armed with concealed weapons. They flanked Sarah as Deacon opened the rear door. "Get in," he ordered, "and don't try anything stupid. There are too many people around who could get hurt." Sarah complied, knowing that this was not the time or place for resistance. As the SUV pulled away from the festival, she focused on memorizing their route and identifying landmarks that would help the Veterans Network track her location. The drive was short, less than 10 minutes before they arrived back at the warehouse. Security had been increased significantly since her morning visit, with armed guards now visible at all entrances. Sarah was escorted directly to the command center, where Raymond Thompson waited his massive frame tents with barely controlled rage. "You disappoint me, Sarah," he said as Deacon pushed her into a chair. "I gave you a simple loyalty test, and you failed spectacularly." Sarah maintained her composure. "There was a man in a gray suit at the blue tent. He was law enforcement. You set me up." Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly, very observant. "Yes, he was DEA. The question is, how did you know that just by looking at him?" He leaned forward, his massive hands flat on the table between them. Only someone with law enforcement experience themselves would have spotted it so quickly. "I was military police before Delta Force," Sarah replied, offering a partial truth. "You learned to recognize the type." Indeed, Thompson studied her for a long moment. "The thing is, Sarah, I've been doing some more checking on you. Your military record ends rather abruptly. Then there's a gap of several years before you suddenly reappear in Oakage. Care to explain what you were doing during that time?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Classified." Thompson's laugh held no humor. "That's what I thought. You're not just ex-military. You're some kind of federal agent," former Sarah corrected. "I'm retired. No one in your line of work ever really retires." Thompson straightened to his full height. "So here's my dilemma. You're clearly working against me. The question is whether you're doing it officially or as some kind of vigilante operation." Sarah said nothing, her silence neither confirming nor denying his speculation. "Here's what I think." Thompson continued, circling the table to stand directly over her. "I think you recognize what we were doing in Oakage and decided to play hero. Maybe called in some favors from old colleagues, but you're not here in any official capacity, are you? If you were, there would have been a task force in town the day after we arrived." His assessment was uncomfortably accurate, but Sarah maintained her neutral expression. "The problem for you," Thompson said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble, "is that vigilantes don't have backup. They don't have extraction plans. They're alone." He was wrong about that, of course. The Veterans Network would already be implementing their contingency plan, but Sarah needed to keep him talking to gather more intelligence and buy time. "What do you want, Thompson?" she asked directly. "Originally a new base of operations somewhere quiet off the radar with easy distribution routes to major cities." Thompson shrugged his massive shoulders. "Now to find out who else knows about our operation here, and to make an example of the delivery girl who thought she could stand in our way." The threat was clear, but Sarah had faced worse. Killing a federal agent, even a former one, brings heat you can't handle. "Who said anything about killing?" Thompson smiled coldly. "There are other ways to send a message." He turned to Deacon. "Take her to the back room. Find out who else in town is working with her, how much they know, who they've contacted outside Oakage." Deacon's answering smile sent a chill through even Sarah's combat-hardened nerves. "With pleasure, boss." As they led her through the warehouse, Sarah continued her tactical assessment. The Iron Skull's operation had expanded since her last observation. More drugs, more weapons, more members. What had begun as an advance force was now a full-scale base of operations with at least 30 gang members present. The back room turned out to be a small office that had been cleared of furniture except for a single metal chair. Sarah was roughly pushed into it, her hands zip-tied to the arms by one of Deacon's associates. "Make yourself comfortable," Deacon said, pulling a knife from his belt and testing the edge with his thumb. "We're going to have a long conversation." Sarah had been trained to resist interrogation, but she knew that even the best training had its limits. She needed to implement her extraction plan before things escalated further. "You're making a mistake," she said calmly. "I'm not alone." Deacon paused, the knife hovering inches from her face. "Is that right? Your geriatric handyman friend coming to save you?" "Not just him." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Did Thompson tell you why he chose Oakage? Did he mention that this town has the highest concentration of combat veterans per capita in the state?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Deacon's face, quickly replaced by contempt. "Old men telling war stories at the bar, not exactly special forces." "Actually," Sarah replied, "that's exactly what they are." Before Deacon could respond, the lights in the warehouse went out, plunging the windowless room into darkness. Seconds later, The distant sound of the generator shutting down was followed by confused shouts from the main floor. Sarah had been anticipating this moment. The Veterans Network had planned for various contingencies, including her capture. The power outage was the first phase of their extraction protocol. In the darkness, Sarah activated the small device hidden in her watch, a localized EMP that fried the electronic lock on the door and temporarily disabled any surveillance equipment in the room. Simultaneously, she executed a move she had practiced countless times in training, dislocating her thumb to slip out of the zip tie on her right hand, then using her freed hand to release her left. Deacon, momentarily disoriented by the sudden darkness, didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Sarah was already moving her combat training, taking over as she delivered a precise strike to his throat that left him gasping for air. She retrieved his knife as he crumpled to the floor, using it to cut the remaining restraints from her wrists. By the time the emergency lighting kicked in, dim red bulbs that cast more shadows than illumination, Sarah was positioned beside the door, Deacon's unconscious form at her feet. Outside, chaos had erupted. The veterans' extraction plan was in full effect. Multiple simultaneous disruptions designed to create confusion and divide the Iron Skull's forces. Through the door, Sarah could hear shouting, the crash of equipment being overturned, and the distinctive pop of smoke grenades being deployed. She waited for a momentary lull in the commotion, then eased the door open just enough to assess the situation. The main floor of the warehouse was filled with swirling smoke, punctuated by the red emergency lights that gave the scene a hellish glow. Iron Skull's members were rushing in multiple directions, some attempting to secure their drug shipment, others grabbing weapons, all reacting to threats from different directions. Sarah spotted her opportunity, a clear path to the side exit, momentarily unguarded, as the Iron Skulls responded to what they believed was a full-scale assault. In reality, the Veterans Network had deployed a series of diversionary tactics. Smoke grenades, sound devices that mimicked gunfire, targeted disruptions to security systems, all designed to create the impression of a larger force than actually existed. Moving silently through the chaos, Sarah made her way toward the exit, avoiding direct confrontation where possible. When an Iron Skull emerged suddenly from the smoke in front of her, she dispatched him with a quick, efficient strike that left him unconscious, but alive. She had almost reached the side door when a massive figure loomed out of the smoke behind her. Raymond Thompson, a shotgun in his hands and fury in his eyes. Running away, Sergeant Miller, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Sarah turned slowly to face him, her body automatically shifting into a combat stance. "Stand down, Thompson. It's over." He laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "Over. This is just a minor inconvenience. My boys will have this sorted out in 10 minutes. Your boys are about to have bigger problems," Sarah replied calmly. "The DEA tactical team you spotted earlier, they were just the advanced scouts. The main forces already in position." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Thompson's face, but he kept the shotgun trained on her. "You're bluffing, am I?" Sarah nodded toward the windows where the distant sound of sirens could now be heard. "That's not part of our distraction plan." Thompson's eyes narrowed as he processed this information. The sirens were indeed getting closer. Not just one or two, but what sounded like a full tactical response. "Even if that's true," he growled, "you won't live to see it." He raised the shotgun, but Sarah was already moving. Years of combat training had honed her reflexes to a razor's edge. She sidestepped the shotgun's aim and closed the distance between them with explosive speed. Thompson, despite his size, wasn't prepared for the focused violence of her attack. Sarah struck with precision, targeting vulnerable points with practiced efficiency. A knife hand strike to the throat, an elbow to the solar plexus, a sweeping kick that unbalanced his massive frame. Thompson staggered back, gasping for breath, the shotgun swinging wildly. Sarah ducked beneath it, then delivered a devastating palm strike to his sternum that sent him crashing into a stack of crates. He recovered more quickly than she expected, his face contorted with rage, as he lunged forward, abandoning the shotgun in favor of his massive fists. One blow caught Sarah on the shoulder, the impact like a sledgehammer that sent her spinning sideways. Sarah rolled with the momentum, using Thompson's greater mass against him. As he charged forward, she pivoted and redirected his force, sending him crashing into a support column. The impact dazed him momentarily, giving Sarah the opening she needed. She delivered a rapid series of strikes to vulnerable nerve clusters, techniques taught only to elite special operators. Thompson's massive body convulsed as pain signals overwhelmed his nervous system. With a final precisely calculated blow to a pressure point at the base of his skull, Sarah sent the Iron Skull's leader crashing to the floor. He lay there, conscious, but immobilized, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Sarah stood over him, her breathing controlled despite the exertion of the fight. Never underestimate a delivery girl, Thompson. The side door burst open, and Frank Wobber appeared, a tactical vest over his flannel shirt and a military raw radio in his hand. "Time to go," he said urgently. "DEA is 3 minutes out." Sarah nodded, giving Thompson a final glance. "Your new accommodations won't be nearly as nice as Oak Ridge. Federal Supermax cells are rather cramped, I hear." Thompson's only response was a groan of pain and fury as Sarah and Frank made their exit into the chaos outside. The scene around the warehouse was one of controlled mayhem. The Veterans Network had executed their plan with military precision, creating multiple diversions, channeling the Iron Skull's response in predictable directions, and securing exit routes for their extraction team. Bill Henderson was waiting in a battered pickup truck, the engine running and the door open. "DEA is moving in from the north," he reported as Sarah and Frank climbed in. "Sheriff Collins has the main road blocked. Looks like most of the Iron Skulls are choosing to surrender rather than fight." Thompson Frank asked, as Bill accelerated away from the warehouse. "Temporarily paralyzed," Sarah replied. "The pressure point technique will wear off in about 20 minutes. Plenty of time for the DEA to secure him." They drove in silence for several minutes, following back roads to avoid the incoming law enforcement convoy. Sarah's mind was already shifting from combat mode to the next phase, ensuring the evidence against the Iron Skulls was properly secured, coordinating with federal authorities and protecting the identities of the Veterans Network. "You okay?" Frank asked, noting her distant expression. Sarah nodded, just planning next steps. Bill guided the truck to a stop at a prearranged meeting point. Doc Wilson's back driveway shielded from the road by a stand of pine trees. Doc was waiting for them, his medical bag at his feet. "Any casualties?" he asked as they approached. "None on our side," Frank reported. "Can't speak for the Iron Skulls." Doc nodded in satisfaction. "Jim Parker's coordinating with the festival security team. They're keeping the civilians contained to the north end of town, away from the warehouse operation." Sarah checked her watch. "The DEA will have the warehouse secured by now. We need to establish our cover story before they start questioning witnesses." The veterans exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. They had prepared for this moment, the transition from covert operation back to their civilian identities. "Standard protocol," Frank confirmed. "We were never there, just concerned citizens who reported suspicious activity to the proper authorities." "And Sarah?" Bill asked, glancing at her. "I'll handle the DEA," she replied. "They'll be curious about a former operator living in Oak Ridge, but they won't press too hard. Professional courtesy." Doc Wilson handed her a set of car keys. "My wife's sedan is in the garage. Better not show up on a bicycle after what you've been through." Sarah accepted the keys with a grateful nod. I need to get back to Ruby's. Marge will be worried." As she drove through town, Sarah observed the aftermath of their operation with professional satisfaction. The festival crowds had been successfully contained to the northern section of Main Street, supervised by Jim Parker and his impromptu security team. Sheriff Collins and his deputies were maintaining roadblocks at strategic points directing DEA vehicles toward the warehouse, and there was no sign of Iron Skull's members anywhere on the streets of Oak Ridge. When Sarah pulled up behind Ruby's cafe, Marge burst through the back door, her face etched with worry. "Thank God!" she exclaimed, and put lenning Sarah into an unexpected hug. "When I heard all the commotion and saw the police cars, I feared the worst." Sarah returned the hug briefly before gently disengaging. "It's over, Marge. The Iron Skulls have been arrested. The town is safe." Marge studied her face, noting the bruise forming on Sarah's cheek, where Thompson's blow had connected. "You weren't just making deliveries today, were you?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Let's just say I delivered something more important than sandwiches." Inside, the cafe business was surprisingly normal. Despite the drama unfolding across town, regular customers sat at their usual tables. Tourists sought refuge from the redirected festival crowds. And the coffee pot was working overtime. Sarah slipped behind the counter, washing her hands and donning her apron as if it were any other day. The routine actions helped center her, transitioning her mind from combat operator back to delivery girl. Over the next few hours, news filtered in through customers and the local radio station. The DEA had conducted a major drug bust at the Old Mill warehouse. Dozens of Iron Skull's members had been arrested, including their leader, Raymond Crusher Thompson. A significant quantity of illegal drugs had been seized, along with weapons and evidence of a large-scale distribution operation. Sheriff Collins was being credited with coordinating with federal authorities, though he seemed surprisingly modest in the brief statement he gave to reporters. No mention was made of a veterans network or a delivery girl who had initiated the entire operation. Just as Sarah was preparing for the evening closing routine, the cafe door opened to admit a man she recognized immediately, the gray suit from the festival, the undercover DEA agent who had been part of Thompson's trap. He took a seat at the counter, ordered coffee from Marge, and waited patiently until Sarah approached him. "Quite a day in Oak Ridge," he commented, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp and assessing. Sarah wiped down the counter, matching his tone. "Festival always brings excitement, some more than others." He sipped his coffee, then set the cup down carefully. "Agent David Mitchell, DEA. Though I suspect you already knew the agency part," Sarah maintained her cover seamlessly. "Just a delivery girl, Agent Mitchell." He smiled slightly. "Of course, and I'm just passing through town." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, sliding it across the counter. "If the delivery girl ever wants to make a career change, there are people who would be very interested in talking to her." Sarah glanced at the card, plain white, with only a phone number embossed on it. No name, no agency, a direct line to someone with significant authority. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, pocketing the card. "But I'm pretty happy with my current job." Mitchell nodded, understanding the subtext of her response. He left a generous tip for his coffee and headed toward the door, pausing to add, "By the way, Thompson keeps insisting he was taken down by, and I quote, some kind of ninja delivery girl." "Interesting story. Sounds like he hit his head during the arrest," Sarah suggested mildly. Mitchell's smile widened slightly. "Must have. The official report will reflect that he resisted arrest and was subdued by DEA tactical officers." He tipped an imaginary hat. "You take care now, Miss Miller." After he left, Marge approached Sarah with wide eyes. "Was that just a customer?" Sarah replied, resuming her closing duties. "Festival brings all types to town. The summer festival continued for 2 more days, though, with a significantly altered atmosphere. The Iron Skull's presence had vanished completely, replaced by an increased law enforcement visibility that reassured tourists and locals alike. The official story, a drug trafficking organization attempting to use the festival as cover for their operation, thwarted by a coordinated local and federal law enforcement, was accepted without question by most. Only a select few knew the truth, that a network of veterans led by an unassuming delivery girl with a classified past had protected their town when official channels would have been too late. On the festival's final evening, as fireworks exploded over Oakage Lake, Sarah sat on the porch of her small house, watching the display with Eleanor beside her. So Eleanor said, after a companionable silence, "What happens now?" Sarah considered the question, her fingers absently touching the DEA business card in her pocket. "We go back to normal. I deliver food. You garden. The town moves on." Eleanor gave her daughter a knowing look. "And when the next threat comes, because there's always another one—" "Isn't there?" Sarah didn't immediately respond. The events of the past few days had awakened something in her, a sense of purpose that had been dormant since she'd left her classified work. Oakage wasn't just a quiet town where she could disappear. It was a community worth protecting, and she wasn't alone in that mission. If another threat comes, she finally said, "They'll find Oakage better prepared than they expect." Eleanor nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Your father would be proud. He always said you had a gift for finding trouble, and the skill to handle it when you did." The fireworks reached their crescendo, filling the night sky with cascades of color and light. Throughout Oakage, people watched in wonder, most unaware of how close their peaceful town had come to becoming collateral damage in the Iron Skull's operation. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Ruby's Cafe at her usual time, 15 minutes before opening. She moved through her familiar routine, brewing coffee, checking supplies, wiping down already clean counters. Marge arrived at 5:55, unlocking the front door with the same brass key her mother had used before her. She raised an eyebrow at Sarah, who was already in full uniform. "After everything that happened," Marge commented, hanging her weathered denim jacket on the coat rack. "You're still the first one here." Sarah poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her boss. "Some things don't change." Marge accepted the coffee, then fixed Sarah with a direct gaze. "But some things do. You're different than you were before the Iron Skulls came to town. Or maybe you're just more yourself now." Sarah considered this assessment, maybe both. The morning proceeded with its usual rhythm of regular customers, familiar orders, and easy conversation. By 9:00 a.m., the post-festival cleanup was underway on Main Street, and Oakage was beginning its return to normalcy. Sarah was organizing delivery orders when the bell above the door chimed. Frank Weber entered, taking his usual seat at the counter. But today he was joined by Bill Henderson, Doc Wilson, and Jim Parker, the core of the Veterans Network that had protected Oakage. Sarah set coffee cups in front of each of them, exchanging subtle nods of recognition. No words were needed between them. They had faced a threat together and emerged victorious, bonds forged in shared purpose that went beyond verbal expression. "Nice quiet town you've got here," Frank commented, his weathered face revealing the ghost of a smile. "Let's keep it that way," Sarah replied, a new certainty in her voice as she moved through her day, serving customers, making deliveries, exchanging pleasant conversation. Sarah Miller, the unassuming delivery girl from Ruby's Cafe, carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. Oakage would remain a sanctuary for those seeking peace after years of conflict. But it was also something more, a community protected by unlikely guardians, veterans who had found purpose in civilian life without forgetting the skills that had defined their military service. And at the center of that protection stood Sarah Miller, who had discovered that sometimes the most important deliveries weren't food or packages, but safety and security for the people and places that mattered most. The story of how a biker slapped a delivery girl and ended up curled beneath his own motorcycle would never appear in the Oakage Gazette. It would never be told in full to the tourists who visited for the summer festival or to the new residents who moved to the small town seeking its peaceful atmosphere. But in the quiet corners of Ruby's Cafe, in the knowing glances exchanged between certain veterans, when strangers passed through town, in the way Sarah Miller scanned every room she entered with the practiced eye of someone who had seen the darkness in the world and stood against it. The legacy of those few days would endure, and any future threat that came to Oakage would discover perhaps too late the danger of underestimating a small town and its seemingly ordinary residents, especially a delivery girl who was far more than she appeared to.